Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Frannie Leautier, and I rise to speak against the motion that building institutions matter more than building infrastructure in uniting Africa. Today is the inaugural African Union Afro-Champion debate series, where we are celebrating continental unity on the occasion of Africa Integration Week. I firmly negate the position that institutions matter more than building infrastructure in uniting Africa. This very debate we're having today, with many of us, including me, in various degrees of lockdown and confinement, would not have been possible without strategic investments in infrastructure. We are all connected to a continental and global audience in real and asynchronous time because of infrastructure investments. The very buildings in which we are confined and from which we are broadcasting to the world are infrastructure. The fiber optic cables that have been laid to carry every byte of our exchanges, or the satellites from which our debate is being carried, all are possible thanks to those infrastructure investments. Telephone systems and broadband networks we are using to record these debates, and the electricity that is powering all these systems is also classified as infrastructure. Indeed, Africa is connected today to celebrate Africa Integration Week, thanks to multiple infrastructure investments made across many countries, and particularly those integrative infrastructures like telecommunications that make us feel like we are all together, connected in the same space. Many of us have even felt the need to connect to people more often. We've been able to do that through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Blue Jeans, WebEx, WhatsApp, and they've all brought us closer together, whether it's to make important policy decisions, to interact with global audiences, or to witness marriages, celebrate births, and even to mourn our departed loved ones. Heads of state and CEOs have kept decision-making flowing to maintain and even extend critical services during this period of pandemic, all enabled by infrastructure investments from the 1980s up to today in this critical backbone communications infrastructure. Indeed, I've witnessed lessons that have been shared about policies or practices and innovations in different parts of Africa shared on Zoom. The World Economic Forum has this weekly platform that brings dialogues on multiple themes, including resilience and navigating the COVID-19 crisis. And these platforms link African decision makers to those in other countries and, of course, to each other. The Economic Commission on Africa has used these infrastructure services to connect ministers to each other across Africa, or even to share ideas on how to navigate the COVID-19 crisis. And in the private sector, the African Finance Corporation recently closed a multi-million-dollar Eurobond, totally based on a digital roadshow, to bring much-needed capital for investing in Africa's integrating infrastructure. So during this crisis, we have been united as a continent to each other and to the world through technology infrastructure. Today, African economies face unprecedented economic challenges. This is following the triple shocks of a global pandemic, the collapse of oil prices, and also massive disruptions to global supply chains. These triple shocks have diverse impacts across individual cities and countries, but their resolution in the short and long term depends on modern, efficient, and reliable integrative infrastructure. Protecting livelihoods, whether it's through direct cash transfers to households or direct cash transfers to individuals, depends on well-functioning mobile money systems. Sending remittances to family members and communities stranded or cut off due to shutting down of air transport and closing country borders has been enabled by effective mobile money systems, all riding on telecommunications infrastructure. And resetting the economies after the COVID crisis would be even more dependent on appropriate infrastructure solutions, especially the kind of infrastructure that enables the rebuilding of supply chains and creation of new supply linkages across neighboring countries, like ports, railways, roads, and airports, in addition to telecommunications infrastructure. Indeed, infrastructure is the backbone of a healthy reset of economies. It erodes divisions between country supply chains created by geography, So a landlocked country can become equal to a sea-facing country. It enables trade between countries, it powers cross-border businesses, and it connects people to jobs and to each other across wide geographies. Estimates of the share of jobs created in the infrastructure sector range at between 6 to 12% of all jobs in the economies of Africa. These include construction workers, truck drivers, train operators, electric pole and cable installers, the people who connect or put in place the telecommunication towers, airline pilots and port workers, to name just a few. Without infrastructure, you cannot achieve regional integration. Infrastructure connects supply chains and moves people, goods, and services across borders. An illustrative recent example is that of Leautier, which is now transporting fresh fish from Lake Victoria in Tanzania to Europe. This was an infrastructure solution that provided jobs to the people of Mwanza and fresh nutrition to the people of Europe, whose supply chains for fresh fish had been disrupted due to COVID-19. And because passenger travel had declined, cargo was replacing the normal revenue flows of the airlines, such as Leautier, and this has allowed Leautier to maintain revenues during this period of lockdown. And having an international standard airport in Mwanza allowed the airline to seal the trade deal between Tanzania, Rwanda, and Europe, thereby integrating Africa to itself and to Europe through trade and transport. Even as we go back to the new normal after the COVID-19 crisis, and as we start to grapple with sustainability challenges, we would have to rely on solutions in the infrastructure sector. Greenhouse gases coming from road transport services can be addressed by switching to cleaner modes of transport like railway and public transit infrastructure. We are united because of the externalities from infrastructure mode choice solutions from one country to the next, whether in cleaner transport or cleaner energy. Many African countries have developed industrialization strategies that transform primary products. That linking such factories to rural areas where agricultural products come from relies on integrative infrastructure, as does the cross-border and inter-country connected infrastructure. Rich natural gas discoveries or mineral discoveries, or if you look at the example of Mozambique with these vast natural gas discoveries, those need trucks, pipelines, and railways to transport the gas for downstream uses in factories and to generate electricity, or to take minerals from the mine to the port or to the factory. And sending products from one country to another, whether it's food in refrigerated trucks, flowers on an airplane, or cotton to a textile factory in a neighboring country, are all enabled or bottlenecked by integrative infrastructure. Lack of roads and logistics services can lead to food insecurity, especially during the rainy season. Africa cannot industrialize optimally as a region without infrastructure. Resilience and recovery from natural disasters like floods and droughts rely on infrastructure solutions, whether it is storm drainage to collect the excess water, whether it's dams and irrigation canals to nourish dry soils, or whether it's harvested rainwater for drinking, farming, and other uses. Even the rescue efforts during a disaster depend on reliable and well-functioning infrastructure. So far, I've been citing examples of physical infrastructure like roads, railways, ports, and airports, but there's also a very important form of infrastructure that is referred to as social infrastructure. As Eric Kleineberg, author of Palaces for People, How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, says, infrastructure is not a term conventionally used to describe the underpinnings of social life. He further argues that the built environment, and not just the cultural preferences, whether it's clothing or food or theater, or the existence of voluntary organizations to support the needy or to offer social services, those are not the only things that influence the breadth and depth of our associations. In fact, he argues that if states and societies do not recognize social infrastructure and how it works, they will fail to see a powerful way to promote civic engagement and social interaction, both within communities and across group lines. Now, what is social infrastructure? It's a subset of the infrastructure sector and includes assets that accommodate social services, whether it is in health, like medical facilities and ancillary infrastructure, or education, like schools, student and faculty residences, civic utilities like community and sports facilities, local government facilities, water and wastewater, and of course transport, whether it's bus stops, rural roads, or parking facilities. Saving lives during this pandemic and in normal times depends on the ability to access health facilities, whether access is by telemedicine, flying doctors, mobile health workers, or ambulances transporting the sick or pregnant mothers. And in some rural areas, bicycles that have to be running on some smoother surface in order to get people to access services such as health. All these systems rely on efficient infrastructure. Basic actions like washing hands, which is one of the basic requirements to protect ourselves from this coronavirus, require water and sanitation solutions, which are at the core of what we call city infrastructure. Maintaining social distancing when economies start to reopen also depends on the effective flow of people in public spaces, whether in office buildings or otherwise. And all these require infrastructure investments to deliver effective solutions. For example, if you're going to put protective barriers at bus and train stops, or if you're going to put barriers in office spaces, in open plan solutions so that there's no infection from one person to the other, all of these require infrastructure investments. So as a continent and as nations, we can unite again safely as our economies open up thanks to these types of infrastructure investments. Finally, even democracy depends on solid infrastructure at the country level, and democracy under regional institutions would be even more reliant on infrastructure. A study done in Kenya by Burgess et al., titled "The Value of Democracy: Evidence from Road Building in Kenya," showed that better distribution of roads across regional zones and ethnic groups could be a good indicator to assess the quality of democracy. Roads can be seen from space and are a good measure of public spending on infrastructure, and so the density of roads across a region is a good measure of integration, but also of inclusive decision-making. So infrastructure patterns are a lead indicator for the quality of inclusion and integration, which is the very definition of the term unity, because according to Webster's dictionary, unity is the state of being joined as a whole, and infrastructure is what joins us as a whole. So in conclusion, I firmly negate the position that institutions matter more than building infrastructure and uniting Africa. Institutions matter, but they don't matter more. Why? Because infrastructure is what made today's continental level debate possible. Infrastructure is critical for Africa to navigate the unprecedented social and economic challenges it faces today because of this triple shock of a global pandemic, collapse of oil prices, and massive disruption to global supply chains, especially given how dependent Africa is on exports. Infrastructure is even more important for regional integration post-COVID as Africa readies itself for a major reset after the crisis. Infrastructure is critical for saving lives and livelihoods, getting us to hospital or getting salaries paid and money transferred directly to households during lockdown. Infrastructure offers solutions for disaster mitigation, recovery, and resilience. Innovations in infrastructure are critical for sustainability and for meeting the SDGs. And I argue that infrastructure will be important, and maybe even very important, as we prepare for a reset world post-lockdown, where we can get back to communicating, seeing, trading with each other, or to sporting and cultural events like the Africa Cup of Nations or Africa Fashion Week. Without infrastructure, there cannot be regional integration, and without regional integration, there cannot be unity. I thank you.